I think one of the main purposes to be here is to try and promote ICCAs, to get ICCAs better recognised and better known within the international human rights and conservation arena, to try and get ICCAs actually included within the different texts coming out from the COP, and to actually raise as much awareness in side events and workshops about ICCAs.
When you talk about working with indigenous people and local communities, what are the challenges do you face in implementing your plans, and how effective give us some examples of some very effective projects that you've done which has brought about some difference?
I think the most important thing is getting communities themselves to document their ICCAs, and is getting communities to actually say what they need. So different projects where communities document their own ICCAs. For example, we have an ICCA toolkit coming out, which is different tools for communities to actually record their ICCAs. So you have something called photo stories, which is where communities make their own photo stories. That's been very effective, and they can tell their own story. The danger, I think, if you have external NGOs, very top-down approaches, where external NGOs come in and often say what they think the community should be saying. So it's about getting communities themselves to access, and I think this COP is really about that, is getting communities to come and actually share their voice and share their needs. Yeah.
Let's take the example of a country like Indonesia.
Yeah.
It's a developing country, and a developing country always faces a debate of economic growth versus conservation. How critical is this debate in the context of Indonesia?
I think actually you've hit a nerve, or you've hit the strongest point, because that's the biggest contention, I feel, that the current rate that Indonesia wants to expand in terms of economically can't really sit so well with the protection of indigenous people and actually recognition of indigenous people. For just take the case of in the case of Papua, we see in the case of Aceh, in fact all over the archipelago, you see sites which are incredibly rich in biodiversity but also very rich in natural resources. In my opinion, the Indonesian government doesn't really want to recognise that as an indigenous land which cannot be extracted, because they want to, if they're going to have $1 billion a year of revenue, they're not going to want to say this is an indigenous land that can't be extracted. So I think that's the key issue, and that's something which actually we need to push for, to say actually these are indigenous communities who are rapidly declining, and if we don't protect them now, then once they're gone, they're gone. So yeah.
I mean, brilliant. I mean, I think a very critical issue has come out of this conversation, that it's very critical that the government acknowledges that the problem is there and acts accordingly. Because if you do not have the cooperation of the government, then the future is completely
But that's
questionable.
If I can say, we have to be really steadfast and completely persistent in the fact that you can't put economic gain over human rights. Right. We have to consider, and Indonesia has to really, really prioritise where it sits on that one. And it has to be a choice. It can't be both.